pre-selected and invested a lot of hope in.
Don't fall over like me, though.
So, BuzzFeed got hold of a letter that the lawyer, John Whelan, had written to Emma Hooser, and there were all sorts of allegations in there. It seemed to be, given the nature of it, the lawyer's letter to her, that it's an inside job, somebody within the Labor Party. You're not going to reveal your sources, but it feels like a vendetta. If Emma Hooser is paranoid, I think she's entitled to be.
Look, I think that obviously I'm not going to speculate about who our sources are, but I have been amused by a lot of the speculation that's been put out there by Emma and Bill Shorten's office. But I think that at the core here, I was interested to hear what Tony Burke had to say, which I think maybe misunderstood the timeline here. That fundamentally, when we broke this story 2 weeks ago, it was because all the staff members that I spoke to that are involved in the investigation didn't believe that there was due process and that they hadn't been given, there wasn't a proper complaints procedure and that there wasn't due process available to them. That's why they decided to go on the record and speak publicly about it.
Why would that be, though? Why wouldn't the Department of Finance
provide
them with that?
Well, because under the MOPS Act, political staff members, and I think a lot of people don't realise this, they're paid by the Department of Finance, but they're technically directly employed by the MP. So when staff members went to the Department of Finance and asked to make a complaint, the Department of Finance said, well, actually, this has nothing to do with us. You have to speak to Emma or you have to speak to the Labor Party. And in terms of an employment law sense, there is no kind of due process or recourse for them because they can't be given their jobs back and they can't be given compensation unless they pursue things civilly. And that, of course, is if the allegations are upheld. But when they went to the Department of Finance and they said, look, there's nothing we can do, they turned around and they spoke to the Labor Party, and the Labor Party kind of dug their heels in a little bit and refused to do anything. They had to, Bill Shorten's office had to intervene in one incident with a staff member, and the party was well aware of it and have been for over a year. But it wasn't until someone threatened to go public that they finally reluctantly agreed 6 months ago to start an investigation. And then they proceeded to launch an investigation that appears to be the most covert investigation I've ever heard of, where half the party officials in New South Wales head office didn't know it was happening. Bill Shorten claims he didn't know it was happening. The New South Wales left absolutely didn't know it was happening until we broke the story 2 weeks ago.
Peter, how's it looking for Emma Hooser?
Well, I think this is the tragedy of the whole thing. Whether she's guilty or innocent, she is now absolutely tarnished. And I accept that it's a legitimate story. It's not a criticism of breaking the story. I just say that with a heavy heart because whether she's ultimately cleared or not by an investigation that is legitimate or not, whether or not this was just a vendetta, as she's claiming, by staff, it almost doesn't matter anymore because there's so much detail in that report that has been aired as speculation, and then obviously you've managed to get hold of it at BuzzFeed. So I accept it's a legitimate story, but I find it just an awful situation where something that at this stage we don't know the outcome to has already damaged her.
That's true, but I also think it's worth pointing out that New South Wales Labor have a track record of not releasing these reports or the recommendations. There was one last year into a New South Wales state MP about sexual harassment and wrongful termination. They refused to release that report.
But you wouldn't release this until the investigation has ended.
Well,
it's still ongoing.
But the staff members that were involved in this investigation were given the impression that it wasn't going to be released. Bill Shorten was asked at the start of the week, depending on how this investigation pans out, will you release the report? And he refused to say whether he would. So I think that in terms of whether or not it's in the public interest to hear the allegations against a sitting federal MP, it absolutely is, especially if...
What is out there now is the part that you publish. Now, the most salacious allegation in that, the sort of Sharon Stone incident that they talked about, that Emma Hooser had somehow flashed herself in front of Jason Clare. That fell apart the moment that the accuser was interviewed by the media, and he said, well, because Jason Clare said this just didn't happen. And
well, that's not true, because the staff member who made the allegations, who was sitting opposite her, maintains that it did happen. And he stands by what he told the investigation. And he said, and as was in the letter, the letter said, the allegation was that Jason Clare was sitting on the floor and potentially didn't see it.
And now the staff member says Jason Clare was sitting next to Emma Hooser. In the allegation that you published, he said that it was directed towards Jason Clare. Now the staff member says, how would he know? How would he know, he said, because Jason Clare was sitting next to her. So that allegation collapses on the accuser's own words.
Well, the person that made the allegation is standing by that it happened.
Yeah, but not that it was directed, and he's no longer saying it was directed towards Jason Clare.
I think he said it was I think he said it was a deliberate action, and not necessarily that it was directed at.
No, I'm looking at your report said it was directed towards Mr. Clare.
Well, the person that made the allegation has maintained that it was a deliberate action and that he saw it happen.
Yeah.
I think generic referencing to allegations around bullying, generic referencing to allegations of sexual misconduct even, and generic allegations of anything to do with entitlements abuse are all absolutely fair game in terms of reporting. But I do think that some of those specifics, when the two parties are denying it, whether they're telling the truth or not, I think that becomes a bit much.
Two of the parties that were in the room. There are other people in the room. But I do think, obviously, a lot of the focus was on the basic instinct stuff because it is salacious, and that's what a lot of people picked up on. But the more serious thing that was in that letter, that was in the story that we wrote this week, is about someone has alleged that there was thousands of dollars that was diverted into a personal bank account, that New South Wales Labor were told about this and came in to do an audit. And when they turned up, that Emma got a bit aggressive at the staff member who dobbed her in. But New South Wales Labor said on the spot, we agree this is inappropriate. And so is that, as the dog walked past. So I think that is a really serious thing that needs to be addressed. And obviously, you know, the investigation is ongoing. It sounds like it'll wrap up within the next few days.
Yeah, I do. I think there are a lot of accusers, and there are a lot of accusations, and it doesn't all swing on the one example that I gave. But what are the options for Labor? Can they, as you know, Tony Burke didn't want to talk about the hypothetical, but Stutch, in your mind, what happens if there is a negative finding? Can she sit in the Parliament until the next election, or
well, presumably, probably Labor doesn't want a by-election in a marginal seat such as Lindsay.
Maybe Malcolm Turnbull doesn't want one.
Maybe Malcolm Turnbull doesn't either. These are findings by a party, and these may be findings by some sort of party process. I'm not sure what standing that has in law or anything.
Well, it has none in employment law. It's just a matter of whether or not they decide to disendorse her.
So that means that